Let us welcome to the show, friend of the show, author, all sorts of things, actually. We'll just say g'day, Byron. Byron Clark. G'day, man. How are you?
Kia ora. I'm good, thank you.
Doing well? Had a good night? You been out?
I have, yeah. I've been out at an iftar event, so first time going to one of those. So that was a new experience.
Explain that to the people. What is it?
Oh, so this is when during Ramadan, when Muslims break the fast at sunset and prayers and shared meals. So I was fed very well. I think since most people there probably hadn't eaten since sun up, they give you a lot of food. And being a guest, everyone was offering me more food, and being one of the few Pākehā people there, people were checking that it's not too spicy for me all the time. I said, don't worry. Behind this pale facade, there's an iron stomach. So.
Hey, Byron, we've got you on to have a chat with us because it's it's not really a news topic. It sort of is, but sort of isn't. It's more of a, I guess, theory topic, maybe, I don't know, ideas topic around hate speech laws versus hate crime laws. We've got an article from Q&A this morning. It's about 5.5 minutes. I don't think we'll play all of it, but we'll start just by starting this off, get the vibe of it, and then we'll go from there. So Q&A this morning, yesterday morning, they were talking a bit about hate crime laws. At the same time, the government's moving away from hate speech laws, but they're moving towards hate crime laws. Let's have a bit of a look as to what they've got to say.
Police are calling a paint attack on a central Auckland rainbow crossing a hate crime.
We don't have specific hate crime offences in New Zealand.
Wellington lawyer Graham Edgler.
When you're talking about hate crime, you're talking about things which are already illegal. So assaulting someone is illegal, burgling someone's house, vandalism is illegal. And so all those things are already crimes. So it's a question of in what way is it worse, or how do you define it to be worse because of the nature of the victim? Certain sorts of things would be easier to prosecute as hate crimes. The difference between vandalism, throwing a brick through a window, which could have a hate element to it, versus vandalism, painting a swastika on the side of a Jewish person's house.
But a hate crime law may be on the horizon. The Law Commission has been instructed to look at hate-motivated offences.
As a coalition agreement said, we've stopped them from carrying on with hate speech legislation reform because that's not something we're going to do. But we have asked them to continue their work on hate crimes.
So in saying that, we'll let this play out. We won't start the conversation too much now. It's interesting that the national government is still pushing towards hate crime laws. Now, we can talk about what the difference are, but I mean, I guess if you had to ask me what my bet would have been, it would have been that they'd probably move away from those as well, but they're not. I don't know whether that's good, bad, or indifferent, but either of you guys want to share anything on that before we keep going?
I think the thing with we're not going to do hate speech, but we are going to do hate crimes. I think the thing that they've missed there is that it doesn't just start with the crime. It's the incitement, it's the working up to it and that sort of thing. Again, we talk about getting into something early. Someone talking in a message board about something, somebody's got to do something about the local mosque and all of this sort of stuff. That it's not a crime. Maybe it should be.
Byron?
I mean, one thing it made me think back to when I was studying criminology quite a few years ago now. But one of the key things I took away from that class I took when I was an undergraduate at university was crime is normal in any society, but the rate of crime changes based on various factors. So if you're wanting to reduce crime, there are policies you can put in place that will reduce the rate of crime. And I think if we're going to start looking more at hate crime, and I think what would be really good is just documenting when a crime is hate motivated, which I understand. I think police are already starting to do that.
Yep.
And I think what we're going to find from that, though, is that we could probably reduce hate motivated crime if we do something about the spread of hate speech. And I think we can compare, hate crime here to hate crime in countries in Europe where there are much stronger hate speech laws. And probably what we're going to find from looking at that is that if we want to reduce those kinds of crime, doing something about the spread of hate speech online, whether that is legislative or whether that is through different policies for the social media platforms, or whether it's something else again, that's probably going to be what this data is going to lead us to.
When they were talking about it in there, the lawyer said it's already illegal, and then he went about the hate crimes. He went on to start by saying, how is it worse? I thought to make something a hate crime, for example, it would be, what's the reason behind it? Like, it may or may not be worse, but if they're committing the crime because the person's Jewish, or because the person's African American, or because whatever. To me, if it was going to be a hate crime, I guess the same as hate speech, is if the reason you're doing it is because of that person's protected class. That's how I think about it. But the gentleman we're looking at right now is the spokesman from the Islamic Federation of New Zealand. They've obviously got some things to say about this. Let's keep going, eh?
He actually thoroughly confused what he's actually wanting.
In a prayer room off Lambton Quay, Abdul Razak shares his astonishment that hate speech has been dropped. He heads the Royal Commission Committee for Local Islamic Organisations.
They're researching the possibility of bringing in hate crime legislation. You're supportive of the hate crime legislation?
Absolutely, but the two are so interlinked. And this clearly stated in the Royal Commission report that you need to look at the expression of hate as part of the hate crime legislation.
Following the Royal Commission report, hate speech reforms were proposed by former Justice Minister Chris Farfoy, watered down by the next Labour Justice Minister Kiri Allen, and vigorously campaigned against by the coalition parties in the lead-up to the election.
Our simple belief is that in a free and open society, the best response to speech that you don't like is more speech rather than police prosecutions.
The Free Speech Union is claiming a chunk of the credit for the dumping of hate speech.
Without a doubt, we were the leaders in the space saying that hateful speech can be a problem, but censorship is not the answer.
Very good one.
Scotland's new hate crime laws were expected to meet a backlash, and here it was on day one.
Scotland's new law, which came into effect earlier this past week, will be keenly observed from here.
Scotland has changed it. It's been somewhat controversial, and I think their law appears to sort of both address hate crime as well as hate speech.
What we've seen in the UK generally, and specifically in Scotland, is this as an ideological rod to beat the backs of opinions that are out of favour at the moment.
It's all about the wording. If you get the wording wrong, you're going to have the same disaster that Scotland is now facing.
You think that's a disaster?
Of course it's a disaster. They didn't have that discussion. So now you have a situation like a very prominent person, J.K. Rowling, saying, hey, I can be accused of hate crime. If I believe in a two-gender approach, it's hate crime.
So I actually think that's quite a good place to start the conversation proper, because you guys tell me if you took this differently, right? But what I just heard Abdul Razak say is that he doesn't think J.K. Rowling should be charged with a hate crime for acknowledging, saying, stating there are only two genders. But there are others out there who think that should be hate speech or a hate crime. And that comes back to that part about who decides. And I think it's a valid question to ask, even though some horrific Atlas network-backed groups also ask that question. Byron, what about your thoughts?
Well, my understanding is that under that legislation they have in Scotland, she wouldn't be charged with a hate crime for saying that, because she has said that, and Scottish police have said, no, we're not going to be going and arresting J.K. Rowling. So I think that demonstrates that there's going to be a high bar for hate speech. And that's what the case has been here as well, when there's been proposals for changes to our existing legislation. Like we already have on the books in the Human Rights Act from 1993, a clause that makes it a crime to incite racial disharmony. So based on somebody's national or ethnic or racial origins. And the time that clause has been used is I think twice, maybe three times in that 30 years, because there's an incredibly high bar. And a lot of what was proposed when we were talking about hate speech laws was just amending that to include religious groups and to include the LGBT community and the disabled. There was also talk of maybe moving it out of the Human Rights Act and into the Crimes Act. But we allowed the debate to really get hijacked by, I think, some disingenuous actors who talked as if suddenly the government was going to come and arrest you for posting, a woman as an adult human female on Twitter or something like that, which was never really going to be the case.
Yeah, absolutely. I think they love that slippery slope argument, and they love shifting the goalposts a little bit. It's they know exactly what they're doing. Like I said earlier in the show, you could go out there on a message board and you could go, somebody should do something about the local mosque. And that wouldn't be hate speech. It's too wide. It could. What do they mean by someone should do something? I mean, you would be able to look at that comment and give it some context and go, oh, well, the guy said it on a white nationalist bulletin board. I think we can work that out. But it's just like you have to prove it. And that's where the argument lies. All of these people are going, oh, it'll be incredibly easy for me to be black bagged in the middle of the night for just saying this controversial comment. It's not like that at all. If it's a crime, it has to be provable, and it has to survive being defended and all of that sort of thing as well. There's only two genders, or all Catholic priests are pedophiles. All of these sort of things that you could say. They're not going to hit that high bar. But I think to ignore the fact that hate speech exists, and there is a very clear link to an incitement or a ramping up to a hate crime, is just, it's not very well thought out. I think there's a debate there. I can sure, free speech, have at it. But there are people being disingenuous, and they're not being honest actors about that discussion.
I think the idea of a call to action, because I think about it, and I've been jotting down notes while I've been talking about it. Like, for me, hate speech, hate crimes, they have to impact a protected class. What is a protected class? And I wrote down a protected class is one you can't become one. Like, you can't join Māoridom. You can't. But then I thought, actually, but you can become disabled.
You join a religion.
So it's not that, but the idea of a call to action, like a call to violence, like, to me that seems to be the criminal act now. So because the crime that's happening, if it's a physical act, you can measure it, you can weigh it up, you can say, yes, the swastika was painted. Right, we can see it. There's something you can feel, touch, and say, and you can draw attention to it. If it's just spoken words and it's being an arsehole towards someone in a racist tone, which we obviously abhor, but there's no call for any kind of action or violence. For me, it's the violence thing within the speech that is the line. Now, I'm not sure. I don't know too much about the Scottish rules and what they've brought in, but I'll do some more reading this week. If you know any more about it than Byron, does that have to do with like a call to action, a call to violence, or can it just be for the words that have been spoken, in a specific way?
I'm not too sure, to be honest. I need to.
But what do you think about the hate speech? The hate speech, how to make that tangible? Like, I mean, in an ideal world, and this is probably not ideal, or it can't happen. In an ideal world, you'd want it to be a bipartisan agreement. So therefore, it's not seen as bloody lefties or the right-wing lunatics or whatever. I don't know if that's possible. Is it possible?
I think it's possible. I mean, there's all sorts of issues that we do have a bipartisan consensus on, and I think we've allowed this issue to become a really divided one. And I think part of the way that that's happened is those minor coalition partners, looking to dog whistle a bit to some of the more unpleasant elements in our society by making this a big deal. I think if you think about politics in the immediate aftermath of the mosque shootings in 2019, at that time, probably we did have a bit of a bipartisan consensus that maybe we needed some change around issues like hate speech, and it's really only been, over the 5 years since, with all this campaigning from the likes of the Free Speech Union and elements within ACT and New Zealand First, that we've really started to see that shift. So I think things could potentially shift in the other direction if this issue could be, seen as something that is bigger than the divide between the centre left and the centre right, and is more something we want to think about, what kind of society do we want to have, and what legislation will we have that isn't just going to get flipped back and forth between different governments, but which will become like a more core part of what kind of society we have.
Because it needs to be something more than just offending someone, eh? It needs to be something more than that.
Yeah.
Maybe that's where the thing is. Chewy, we'll wrap this up in a tick. What do you want to add in towards the end of this chat, Chewy?
I just want, like, there's people going on in the chat about, like, who gets to decide what hate speech is, and this is exactly my point. I kind of wish that Free Speech Union were, and again, not a union. These people that are just anti it would actually get into the discussion with good faith. They just don't want it at all, and they're just throwing out some really hyperbolic answers and examples and that sort of thing. And I just wish that the debate would be had with some intellectual honesty, because if we can get through that and everybody gets to prove their case right, which is exactly what they should be for, right? More speech and discussion. We want to have a discussion about this because it's a real problem. Like, we're just thrashing things out of, like, what could be the shape of it. Whatever it is has to be strong enough to hold up in a court of law, be flexible enough that it stands up to the test of time, changes in society and current affairs and all of that sort of stuff, and that it can't be weaponized against us if a government, there's a change of government or something like that. Like, there's been lots of times where people have been, they've been on the up of an argument, and then it's turned around and changed, and you've got search and seizure laws deployed against you. You've got the police infiltrating activist groups and all sorts of stuff like that. It has to stand up to that. You've got to build a law that can't be weaponized against yourself. But I think the way that we are and where the discussion is these days, what is able to be said online, the way that people are able to connect with people that might share these abhorrent views, we need to be able to build something that shows us what that is, shows us what the shape of it is, and to be able to stop these things from happening before they get to something like what happened in Christchurch. There's a lot of, I'm not the biggest fan of religion, but often religion is a button point for people to be attacked or victimized or that sort of thing. That's a protected category. Disabled people. The LGBTQI community is obviously copping a whole bunch of flack. You can sit there and you can go, I don't agree with the gay lifestyle all day long. Have at it. The moment that you say that all gays are pedophiles and should be shot on sight, that's a very different statement. And that, I think, goes back to you saying about a call to action, a specificity. But then people can get around that, right? Like what I was saying, somebody should do something about the local mosque. We all know what I'm talking about, but I'm not going to say it because I'm not crazy.
That's the grey area where laws would have to be clearer, and could they be? But yeah, I think I like what I hear you guys saying, and I'm probably a victim of it, is to not be dragged by the extremes that have been used as the examples. If I don't know what the Scottish law is, I'll have to read into it. But if there is a sensible middle ground, then maybe that's the path to start to have a look at, whatever that is. Anything from you to finish off with, Byron? You are our guest, of course.
Yeah, I guess the point, and I'm sorry I lost audio for a few minutes earlier, so sorry if this has already been mentioned, but one of the things we do have in existing laws is it's very clear cut if you threaten an individual, but we don't have something similar for threatening a group of people. So if somebody says they're going to kill me, they've likely committed a crime. I can contact police. If somebody says they're going to kill Muslims, they're going to kill trans people, they're going to kill Jewish people, etc., police probably still want to know about it, but it's not actually a crime that is prosecutable. So that's maybe an example of where, maybe that's a more clear-cut example where perhaps some laws could be changed, and there'd still be some grey areas, but that's always going to be the case.
Probably would also have to be, I can't think of the right word, but a genuine threat. Like something that's tangible. Like we lose the Rugby World Cup, I could fucking kill an Aussie right now. Very different. There'd have to be some kind of, I guess, evidence that this is something that could therefore happen as well. But but I guess we'll keep talking about it. Hey, Byron, thanks for joining us tonight, mate. I appreciate you giving up some of your time whilst you're trying to digest your dinner, which I'm sure you'll be up for the next 2 hours to do. All right, dude. All the best. Appreciate your time.